Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and there's a bin that I want to feed. It's the bin that's straight ahead here. It's a bin of African nightcrawler worms. The bin was last fed 10 days ago. We gave them some pumpkin, we gave them some coffee. At that time they were 280 days of age. Today, 10 days later, 290 days of age. We already hinted last time how we might want to start gearing this system up for migration to get the worms out of there, harvest the castings, but we did also indicate that we might give them a couple more feedings, and I think we're going to do just that today. I'm going to give them some coffee, I'm going to give them some worm chow, no bedding, just a sort of feeding which I would expect to pretty much all be gone with no traces after a short while. So I'm going to get this bin up on the bench, and we're going to get them fed. So let's get to work. A lot of times I'll bring the coffee down here within its filter, but instead I'm using my little transport carton here, and it's got a couple days worth of coffee down there in the bottom. It's kind of dark, I'm not sure if you can see it. So that's what they're getting, and the worm chow that I made reference to earlier is the stuff over here in this jar. And this batch is a variety of different stuff: pulverized birdseed, some mix, waffle pancake mix, what else? Neem seed meal, a couple other things, maybe some starch, I can't remember. It's usually just whatever I've got laying around, anything that seems like it'll be stuff that the worms will eat. So now you can see how I sort of left this plastic covering on in such a way that it was allowing for a good bit of moisture around the edges. And we did that because we did notice how there was a pretty good bit of moisture in here. In fact, when I lift the container, it's got a good bit of weight to it, presumably because it's pretty damp. And I even thought, at first, just like I said earlier, we left the plastic off with the intention of letting the system breathe a little bit and dry. But I kind of had a little bit of change of heart on that. I was thinking that if all these little scraps of paper and cardboard that we see everywhere is to break down, we're probably a little bit better off actually perhaps going back to full thorough coverings where everything stays nice and damp. And then this stuff will have a much better chance at eventually getting nibbled down too, instead of just sitting here dry. So I don't know, I was just looking at these. It looks to me like mites, but their color is so interesting. They look kind of gold in color almost. Sometimes I see mites in my system that are white in color, and these mites are brown, I guess. At first they look kind of gold, maybe just because of the light coming off of them, reflecting off of them. And it does look to me as if they're kind of feasting on a demised worm, or maybe even a couple demised worms. Interesting. Not too surprising that, you have a dead worm, the mites are going to feast on it. So for a while, I was applying BTI solution to all my systems, mainly to try to combat flying insects, but I believe this stuff also had another side effect, which was to severely limit the number of mites I found in my systems. So I don't think by finding a few mites out there eating the corpse of a dead worm, I don't think that's a big problem, really, because all systems have mites in them to some degree, I believe. And they are the cleanup crew, basically. That is kind of their job, to do what they're doing there. But if we start seeing real outbreaks, then, it might be time to start bringing the BTI back in to try to control their numbers a little bit. But let's take a quick look through the system, see how things are coming along. So last time we were in here, we fed pumpkin. It was fed right down the middle. That's what the coffee filter was showing us, which was where we last fed. But I figured we'd take the out route first, the outer edges. Check them out, see how things look on the outer edges. Make sure everything looks okay. See some nice chunky worms. The moisture level's pretty high. Everything seems kind of damp, but luckily the material is still fairly crumbly and loose. I usually don't worry too much, even if it feels to me like stuff is very, very damp. As long as it crumbles readily, I don't worry too much about it. And as long as there's worms in it, I assume everything's okay. I assume we're going to find similar conditions on the opposite edge, so let's take a look over there too. Yeah, I can feel the moisture for sure as I plow through the material with my hands. But once again, it all crumbles apart pretty nicely. Perhaps not perfectly. Perhaps it would have a hard time passing through a screen if I was trying to make that happen. But I think just for the purposes of gauging whether or not it's becoming sort of clumpy and muddy and anaerobic or problematic in some other way, I don't think we're seeing any signs of that, so that's pretty good. I guess it also kind of gives me a little peace of mind to know that we've aerated stuff a little bit throughout the bin by giving it a quick inspection around. So I guess, with day 300 only 10 days away at this point, I figured we'd come in here after a 10-day interval, give them a feeding. We'll probably come back if the timing of things works out properly. We'll probably come back in again in another 10 days to celebrate the bin's 300th day in service. And then maybe we'll give it its final feeding. This would be feeding number 24, and if we give it one more feeding 10 days from now, that will be feeding number 25. And then perhaps we'll give the bin a little period of foraging, because here and there I do bump into stuff like a corn cob bit like this. And normally I don't really try to help foods break down too much, but I am starting to feel like if we're going to be approaching a point in time soon when we want to help drive this system to completion, perhaps it would make good sense to take larger chunks of leftover food like those bits of corn cob and bust them up a little bit. And by doing so, we're just increasing the surface area of that food so that it has the potential to get approached from many more angles by many more worms and possibly get eaten up a little bit more rapidly than it would otherwise. Now, I definitely saw a couple chunks of pumpkin as I was excavating, but just a hint of it, I think, somewhere. I mean, there's not like tons of leftover pumpkin, that's for sure. And I'm not too surprised. I sort of expected that we wouldn't see any leftovers of the pumpkin. I debated on whether 10 days was too soon to come back in here to feed, but it does seem like the timing of this check-in is pretty decent. So we'll drop some coffee down into the middle of the bin for them to nibble on. A little worm chow. But first, let's let them settle in. Here I can see some leftovers of the coffee filter that went into the feeding last time with the coffee they got. There's not a whole lot of it remaining. That was pretty much the only bedding that was included with the last feeding. It looks like here we've got the leftovers of a banana stem. Gradually getting whittled down. This too, I guess, is probably something that might benefit from being broken up a little bit. So I'm going to do that. And I guess if we encounter any other larger chunks of food along the way, we'll see if we can help them to the finish line as well. Here's another piece of corn cob. I can already recognize what it feels like when it's in my hand. All right, let's drop in today's feeding. It's just this couple days worth of coffee that I placed into this carton here. So I'm just going to spread it out, and it almost looks just like the surrounding castings. But just to make it a little bit more interesting, I'm going to blend it with worm chow. And that's it. That's going to be their feeding today. I'd really like them to, to get a feeding to help keep the activity in here moving. But I do want them to really focus on leftovers and bedding, the remains of the bedding that's floating around in here. So I don't know what this is. I wonder if this might even be a piece of pumpkin from last time. It's kind of stiff and weird. And this is that darn blue stuff that made it into my shredder at some point. So I keep finding that stuff in all my systems. So annoying. Alright, that was a pretty fun check-in, but I really didn't want to make a big federal case out of it. I want it to be a really lightweight, easy feeding for them. I figured if we found leftovers, we would start helping those leftovers make it to the finish line a little bit more readily by busting them up if we find them. So that's corn cob bits, that's banana stems, anything that might benefit from being fragmented into slightly smaller pieces. I'm going to see what I could do now to try to make all those leftover things become a little bit easier for the worms to gradually break down. And then I guess maybe if we don't forget, if the timing of it works out, we'll come back in here in another 10 days to help them celebrate day 300 in service. And then chances are at that point we'll give them their final feeding, and then we'll set this system off on a period of what I refer to as foraging. This might be part of that coffee filter they got last time too. So we'll just drop that down here in the feeding area as well. Hopefully they'll be able to nibble away on that further and do away with it. And at some point soon it would be nice to start seeing very little leftover scraps of bedding, scraps of food, and basically castings only. But while we still have stuff like that, that all still needs processing and breakdown, there's the definite advantage to keeping the moisture level a little bit higher, because the dampness keeps everything soft, and it also keeps everything comfortable for the worms to want to approach. So I wouldn't want to have sections of this bin starting to dry out, which would turn it into, you know, an area that the worms just don't feel comfortable exploring or wandering into. So I do believe that at this point we are going to benefit from just putting the top back on a little bit more thoroughly than we did last time, and sort of reversing that thinking that we had last time that some drying here might benefit the bin. I think keeping things nice and damp, at least for a little while longer, to help with the breakdown of all the residual stuff that's floating around in here, will definitely be to the benefit of the bin's, you know, progress, basically. So, back on with the plastic, but this time in a way that really goes from edge to edge, all the way around, keeping everything in here nice and damp for the worms. And like I said before, if we don't forget, we'll come back in here in another 10 days, give them what will probably be their last feeding, and officially start foraging. So that's feeding number 24 for the 290-day-old bin of African night crawlers. All right, everyone, I got a few things I've got to take care of putting away and cleaning up, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go there really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.